All right, welcome, good morning to the Minerals Business and Economic Committee. We will be dealing with Senate files today. It's our transition into a different mode. So, Mark, would you call the roll, please?
Representative Campbell.
Here.
Representative Knapp.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Lawley.
Excused?
Representative Riggins.
Excused?
Representative Schmidt.
Here.
Representative Tarver.
Here.
Representative Weber.
Here.
Chairman Heiner.
Here. Thank you, everyone. So, committee members, in your folders, you have a white copy and a blue copy. A blue means it's been engrossed, so it includes all the changes that were made in the other chamber. The white is as introduced, and apparently there were no changes in the other chamber on the white ones, right? Mark, is that correct? Yes, so Senate File 15 has no changes. When we get to Senate File 16, you'll have two copies, a white as originally introduced, and the engrossed copy is in blue.
I was instructed not to give this one unless you asked for it.
Okay,
So I gave you a copy.
so everybody just has the blue copies?
Yes.
Okay, great. I guess I have a bootleg copy of the white one, so. All right, so Senate File 15. I guess I have not been on top of my game here. Are you introducing this? Okay, thank you. And committee members, these are committee bills, so we will need someone on our committee to carry these onto the floor if they pass our committee. So be thinking about that. If anyone would like to volunteer, let me know, please. Otherwise, we'll assign those. So thank you for being here. Thank you for covering for me.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Tom Kropatch. I'm the State Oil and Gas Supervisor for the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. Senate File 15 was a bill, as you said, Mr. Chairman, that was brought in the interim and worked through the interim process. And what a fairly simple bill on the face of it, what the bill does is just strike some language from an existing statute at the Oil and Gas Commission. That is 30-5-104, Part D, A. And if you look on the second page of that bill, it strikes the language in that section A that historically said on a lease, unit, or communitized area. And so what this section of the statutes does is grants the commission authority to regulate various oil field pits. And historically, those were to be located on a lease or in a unit or in a communitized area. And we asked the committee to look at a bill to strike that language for one main reason, and it relates to the produced water reservoirs. Industry has a couple new technologies that they're using that makes this necessary and would help reduce cost and make them more competitive with other states. But horizontal drilling kind of changed the way we think about fields. You know, we're not in an oil and gas field anymore. We're thinking basin-wide for a lot of wells, especially in Outer River Basin, for example. And so the lease, unit, communitized area just doesn't really fit a horizontal well anymore. One well may cross multiple leases, for example. And so the other technological advance, which is a little more recent than horizontal drilling, is the ability to reuse produced water in their operations. So in drilling and well completion, hydraulic fracturing, they can use that saltier water from produced water in those operations now, which historically they did not want to do, especially in hydraulic fracturing scenarios. So as industry starts to reuse the produced water, restricting the location of where these reservoirs could be constructed or where we have authority to permit them, essentially made industry permit more of them. You had to have them located nearby your well instead of being able to permit them centralized in amongst all of your operations. So if they're drilling a pad in Converse County, and then they're gonna move to one in southern Campbell County, and they wanna put a reservoir in between both of those and have the water stored from all of their production in that area, in that reservoir to reuse at both of those drilling pad locations. They could do that instead of having to build 2 reservoirs at each drilling pad location. So what this would do is allow us to permit those centralized reservoirs so that industry could reuse the water a little easier and a little more cost effectively. It doesn't change at all the way that the requirements for the construction or operation of these reservoirs. So we're not changing how we permit them, how they have to construct them, the monitoring they need to do on those for leak detection and other things like that. That would be all the same. It'd be exactly the same as they do now when they build them next to a pad. It would just be where they can be located. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think that is probably a sufficient explanation, but would take any other questions there might be.
Thank you, Director. Any questions for the Director? I have one question, Director. How does this interface with the Department of Environmental Quality? So we anticipate this could open up more centralized pits that are larger in capacity. How does that interface with the DEQ?
Mr. Chairman, the DEQ has authority to permit these types of reservoirs that would be commercial oil field waste disposal facilities. I think there was a little gap on the in the statutes of these centralized facilities. We could permit them on a lease or in a unit. The DEQ can permit them if they're commercial oil field waste disposal facilities, but there is really no language to say these reuse reservoirs is what they're really called. We're not disposing. They're not used for disposal. If the water ever needed to go to disposal, they would go to a Class 2 disposal well or to a commercial facility. They wouldn't be disposed of in these reservoirs. They're not commercial. It's one operator builds it for their use. So it's not a commercial operation between operators. So there is a gap of who could regulate a centralized water reuse reservoir.
So, Director, the DEQ in these situations, they don't have to permit these centralized pits as long as they're not commercial for multiple operators. Is that what I'm understanding?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. It would be permitted through the commission and no interface with the DEQ on that regard. Now, there is some interface if, for example, there was a leak out of one or something like that, then we'd work together with the DEQ to make sure it was remediated appropriately. But.
So just for the benefit of the committee members, Commissioner, could you explain what kind of leak detection systems you have, double liners and whatever may be required?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, they do. We do require double liners on those with leak detection in between the liners. So what that means is usually a series of piping to a sump where the water, or just sloping to a sump where the water would collect, and then they'd have to go out and monitor that. There's a certain rate of volume of water in there that is allowable. That may be condensation or something else. But if that gets to a larger level, then they have to do repairs on that inner liner, and then the lower liner, they may have to recheck that too if there's repairs necessary. But it's probably a weekly, and in some cases maybe a daily monitoring of that sump to ensure that there is no leak between the liners.
Thank you. Any further questions for the Commissioner? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other government departments? Seeing none, any citizens in the room that would like to testify on this bill? Senate File 15. No citizens? We'll open it up to those that represent organizations. Mr. Obermueller, welcome.
Mr. Chairman. Hello, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Pete Obermueller, President of the Petroleum Association of Wyoming. I simply wanted to say that we support the bill.
That's it?
Yay.
Where's my diary? This is a diary entry here. Well, thank you, Mr. Obermueller. Any questions, Mr. Obermueller? It's turning out to be a very good day, isn't it? Any other individuals that would like to testify on this? Online, do we have anyone online, Mark? Tanner? No. All right, with that, we'll close public testimony. Committee members, what's your pleasure? Moved by Vice Chair Tarver, seconded by Representative Campbell. It's going to be a long bill, so let's go through it page by page. Page number 1, any conversation, comments, changes? Page number 2. All right, any discussion? Question being called. Mark, this is a roll call vote. Would you please call the roll?
Voting on, voting on Senate File 15 with no amendments. Excuse me. Representative Campbell.
Aye.
Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Lawley.
Excused.
Representative Riggins is excused.
Excused.
Representative Schmidt.
Aye.
Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Weber.
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
Vote is 7-2. This is a due pass.
All right, thank you, committee members. Thank you for volunteering, Representative Campbell. So Representative Campbell will carry this on the floor. Senate File 15 has passed the Minerals Committee. Next on our list is Senate File 16. I will present that if you will, Chair.
Mr. Chairman, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, committee members. Good morning. This is has to do with the Industrial Siting Act, which was put into place in 1976. And it's designed to organize our large projects throughout Wyoming, projects that are currently over about $350 million goes through the Industrial Siting Act. They need a permit from the Industrial Siting Commission. This is the final permit from the state. So they get all the permits from the DEQ, all the various organizations, and then this is a chance to bring it all together to make sure there's nothing missing. As we heard testimony during the summertime, during the interim, we recognize that sometimes as we notify local government agencies, counties and municipalities and landowners, we sometimes fail to notify our tribal governments about this. So it doesn't give them any additional authority, it's strictly notification. So on page 2, we define who the tribal government is, and this is the Eastern Shoshone tribe as well as the Northern Arapaho tribe of the Wind River Indian Reservation and the cooperative tribal governing body. And then on lines 15 through 17, not more than 7 days following the request for a waiver. So in the Industrial Siting Act, there's a waiver and there's a permit. So if you don't want to, if it's a project that's pretty simplified, you can go through this waiver process or go through the whole permit. And actually, we have very few that go through the waiver process because it's almost the same requirements. So almost all of them go through the permitting. But this first section is dealing with that permit process, and it says that the director shall serve notice of the request for a waiver upon the tribal government located within the same adjacent county where the industrial facility will be located. And then turning to page 3, this is more to do with the actual permitting. If they choose to go through a permitting process, not more than 10 days following the receipt of the application for the permit, the director shall serve an electronic or physical copy of the application. This is bottom page 3. And notice of hearing upon the tribal government on top of page 4, located within the same or adjacent county to where the industrial facility will be located. Again, this gives no additional authority to the tribal entities. All it does is gives them a chance to be aware of some of these large industrial facilities that are being permitted in the vicinity, so that they will be aware of that. And with that, I'll stand for questions, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, any questions? You did a great job. No questions.
Well, thank you. May I come back to the
Please
dais?
do. Oh, wait a second. Wait, never mind. Representative Campbell.
Yeah, while you're there, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Basically, all this is doing is this is ensuring in writing that the tribes have 7 days notification, correct?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vice Chair, Representative Campbell, that is correct. 7 days for a waiver, 10 days for a permit. So whichever track the prospective company follows, it's just notification. That there's no permit involved, no authorization involved, it's just notification. And it's
It's a good
just
name.
being a good neighbor, letting the tribes know what's going on in the vicinity.
Committee, any further questions? Mr. Chairman, please come back. Do we have any other government agencies that would like to testify? Good morning, and please introduce yourself and give us your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Heiner, Representative Tarver, and representatives. I'm Jenny Staben, the Administrator of Industrial Siting at DEQ, and I do have a couple of comments today on Senate File 16. Typically, when I do talk on a bill, it's to talk about procedural issues. When it comes to this bill was crafted to be and to fall within all the current industrial siting procedures. So quite frankly, on page 2, the definition of tribal government, that definition is the same across several statutes within our state. So it falls very well across other statutes. What this bill does is it does require the Industrial Siting Division to provide notice of an application when an application is pending for an industrial siting permit. To reiterate what Chairman Heiner said, this is essentially being a good neighbor. The bill would require notice when an industrial siting project is placed within a county that is within the same or adjacent to where tribal government is located. Honestly, right now, the division, we identify what local governments qualify for impact assistance and what local governments would be impacted by a project. That is who we notify of industrial siting applications. What this bill does is it does not make tribal nations a party to the permit, but what it does is it does notify them that a project is pending and informs them of their right to do what is called a limited appearance statement. Industrial siting permits are unique in that they are not your traditional permit issued by a division within DEQ. They are a permit issued by a council through contested case proceedings. And under the current rules within the Industrial Siting Act, anyone can provide a limited appearance statement, which is essentially a public comment. It just has to be in a written form because our proceedings are through a contested case process. So again, this basically codifies a requirement for us to notify tribal nations. At this time, under my administration, the division does notify the tribal nations listed here in this bill. As a courtesy, we do have a list where folks can ask to be notified, and they are on that list. This would just codify that current process to ensure that such notifications continue in the future. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Staben. Any questions from the committee? Please, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So I have to ask this question. This bill came up for a reason. What created the reason for the bill?
Ms. Staben.
Representative Tarver, Representative Schmid, it's my understanding that our mailing list where folks have asked for notification, this would just ensure, may not have been consistent in the past, or because it's a voluntary request folks sign up for, this would just simply codify it to make sure that such notifications are always to continue in the future.
Follow-up? Thank you, Ms. Staben. I guess you're off the hook.
Thank you, Representative Tarver and committee.
Do we have any other government agencies? Please come forth. Good morning. So whoever wants to start, please introduce yourself and begin.
Good morning, Chairman Heiner, members of the committee, Chairman Tarver. My name is Kit Wetland, Special Counsel, Tribal Relations Policy Advisor to Governor Gordon. I'll quick have our two tribal liaisons introduce themselves, if that's all right, and then quick give our position on the bill.
Please.
Good morning, Chairman Heiner and representatives. I'm James Sarles. I am the tribal liaison to the Eastern Shoshone Tribe out of Governor Gordon's office.
Good morning, Chairman, Representatives. Anita Roman, Tribal Liaison for the Northern Arapaho Tribe under Governor Mark Gordon.
Mr. Chairman, just short and sweet, Governor's office supports this bill. Tribal nations, especially the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone here in Wyoming, should have notice of these projects that may affect them. We've been watching this bill all through Tribal Select and just wanted to show up here and say we support the bill moving forward as is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning again, Chairman Heiner and committee. And like I said, I'm James Sarles, tribal liaison. However, I cannot speak for the Shoshone tribe. They are aware of the bill and they do say it's, they do agree with it. I think it's been happening in the past that they have been getting some notifications. However, sometimes, their tribal council, you have different ones that come in and out. So it just, you always have to keep up on it and, make sure that it's going to the right person. Again, just want to reiterate that Governor Gordon does stand for this bill as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Chairman, Representatives, while I don't speak for the Northern Arapaho Tribe, I do speak with them often. And so they're fully aware of this bill. It was, went through Select Tribal under Chairwoman Affie Ellis and Chairwoman Ember Oakley, and it was a really agreeable bill.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Are there any other government agencies? Do we have any citizens in the room that would like to testify? Please come forth. And if you'd introduce yourself and give us your testimony, that'd be great.
Good morning, committee. My name is Claire Johnson, and I'm the Attorney General for the Northern Arapaho Tribe. And I want to say that the Northern Arapaho Tribe is in strong support of the bill as is. It worked through Tribal Select Committee. We want to thank the legislature for their consideration, and we appreciate this bill to give us notification. So, thank you.
Well, thank you. Any questions, committee? Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Could you tell us, we've got the blue copy, which means it was engrossed. It means that there were some changes made in the other chamber. Do you know what those changes were and the reasons for the changes?
Ms. Johnson, please.
I apologize, I do not. I'm working off my phone this morning, so I don't have it with me. But I can't answer questions today, so thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other citizens in the room that would like to testify? Please introduce yourself and give us your testimony.
Good morning.
Is it a green?
It's not, there you go. Good morning. My name is Bigwin Carpenter, Northern Arapaho Tribal member, and I am representing the Wyoming Outdoor Council. And wanted to address that we support the tribal notification. The Outdoor Council has weighed in on proper industrial siting in the past, and we stand beside and behind the tribes in support of this bill. And Just want to say that this bill does not have a fiscal note attached, so it wouldn't affect or impact the impact funds. And we believe that is a step in the right direction. Oftentimes, when tribes aren't notified up front, it creates problems in the back end of things. And that's how I have to say it. I will answer for any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Committee, any questions? Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. All right, now the professional talkers. Do we have any that want to speak? Look, there's two of them laughing. You guys want to come up and speak? No? All right. Yes, please, sir. Come forth. You're a government and a professional talker. That's good.
Well, I did go to law school, Mr. Chairman.
Please introduce yourself again and testimony.
Kay Wentland, Special Counsel, Tribal Relations Policy Advisor to Governor Gordon. Just to answer Chairman Heiner's question before, from what I understand, it was a very short amendment in the effective section. I forget the number. They just made sure the word effective was after the word are. So it would say sections are effective upon. That was the only amendment. So I think it was just correcting a typo.
Thank you for the clarification. Committee, any questions since we got him back up here? No, thank you, sir. Do we have any online? Nothing online. Committee, what would you like to do? Moved by Representative Schmidt and seconded by Representative Weber. Committee, would you like to work the bill? Question being called, I guess. Roll.
We're voting on Senate File 16 with no amendments. Representative Campbell.
Aye.
Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Lawley.
Excused?
Representative Riggins.
Excused.
Representative Schmidt.
Aye.
Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Weber.
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
Vote is 7-0. This would pass.
Mr. Chairman, I can work this on the floor if you'd like.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you. Representative Knapp has volunteered to carry this on the floor. Appreciate that. We will now move on to our final bill, Senate File 20. Thank you for those that attended from the tribes. Thank you very much for being here. All right, does anyone want to present Senate File 20? I'm so glad you volunteered. Tom, thank you. I know this is an important bill for our industry, so please
Yes.
proceed.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Again, my name is Tom Kropatch. I'm the Oil and Gas Supervisor for the Oil and Gas Commission. Mr. Chairman, my copy's white, but I'm working off the engrossed copy because there was a minor amendment in the other side, so I'll mention that when I get to it, but hopefully my page and line numbers match up with yours. Mr. Chairman, again, this was an interim topic, and maybe a little background before I jump into the bill of why it was brought to the committee's attention during the interim. But this was a result of a federal rulemaking that was done and actually implemented this last summer in June of 2024 by the federal agency that manages oil and gas and other federal lands in the state. And they passed a rule, it was titled Fluid Mineral Leases and Leasing Process. And in part, what the bill did was modify the bonding requirements on oil and gas operators who operate on federal lands. And so in the previous rules at this agency, you could have a lease bond for $10,000 if you were an operator. You could post a statewide bond if you had multiple leases in the state, and that statewide bond cost was $25,000. And you could do a nationwide bond if you operated in multiple states. And off the top of my head, I don't know what that is, but they just completely eliminated the nationwide bond, so it really doesn't matter much anymore. But the lease bond went from $10,000 up to $150,000 now. So that's the minimum bond that an operator has to post for an oil and gas lease, a single lease. If you have multiple leases and wanted to post a statewide bond, it went from $25,000 up to $500,000. And so obviously, Mr. Chairman, that puts a strain on our local and smaller oil and gas companies to try to come up with the funding for that bond. They did in their final rule push the effective date of the bonding requirements out to June of 2026. So they gave most operators a little bit of time to try to comply with that. But what we understand at this point is if you have to replace your bond, or if you're a new operator coming in and posting a new bond because you hadn't had one posted in the past, that they're implementing those requirements right now. So if you have a letter of credit and it's expiring and you have to replace it, you have to replace it at the new amount. Or if you're a new operator, or if you're purchasing new or leasing new lands, you'd have to post the new bond on those, on any changes you're making. So it is impacting, as we understand it, some operators at this point. And so in part of our analysis that we did for our comments to the rule, we estimated that the bond amount is greater than the gross revenue, even accounting for royalties, severance ad valorem, taxes they pay. More than 25% of the operators in the state, that bond amount is more than their revenue for a year. So, you know, that's, and when you count other expenses, it's even more than the 25%. So that kind of gives you an idea of the impact that may have. So the interim committee formed a work group that formed this bill. And during that time and in the work group, even though it was designed to initially address the federal bonding, we decided, you know, there's no reason why to limit it to federal. It could apply to all the bonding oil and gas operators have to do, either for the Oil and Gas Commission or for Office of State Lands and Investments or for the federal agency. And so in the bill here, you won't see anything directly related to the federal bonding. It's just open to any operator who has to post bonds, and they could participate in this program. And I think also to start, and before I jump into the language of the bill, this is a voluntary program. No one would force any operator to participate in it. It's all completely voluntary from an operator standpoint. If they can post bonds and using current process where they just go secure a bond from a third party or a letter of credit from a bank, they can still go do that. And the funding of this program is by those operators who voluntarily participate. So there isn't any other sources of funding. Those operators are paying for the program. And I'll get into that as we walk through the bill, how that works. And so, Mr. Chairman, starting on the bottom of page 1, this is a new section in the statutes, 30-5-129, that would be put into the commission's statute related to bonding. At top of page 2, it requires the commission to promulgate rules in addition to the current statute that we have on bonding, which is 30-5-104 as referenced there on line 3 of page 2. And then the rest of the bill kind of spells out what the bonding program requires, or what our rulemaking would require to include in the bonding program. So again, page 2, line 8, the commission shall promulgate rules to implement the program and to provide for operators who produce oil and gas to voluntarily participate in a bonding pool established in this statute. If an operator is participating in the bonding pool, in the bottom part of page 2, then they have to be in good standing with the commission before they're allowed to participate. They need to remain in good standing with our current bonding requirements, and we can also create a process where if they're no longer in good standing, that their participation in the program is removed, or they're removed from participation in the program. Moving on to page 3. And maybe, Mr. Chairman, before I go into the next sections, this statute or this proposed bill has kind of 3 parts to the bonding program. So there's some repetition for each of the parts, and I'll point those out. But what it does is it initially provides for a third-party option. And because of the timing of the federal requirements, if we can't make an agreement with a third party, then it allows the commission to operate the bonding pool on its own so that we don't miss that deadline and have operators impacted by the rule. And then the third part is a backstop to the bonding financial assurance backstops. And so we'll get into that. But so on top of page 3, section 3 there, line 1, It says the commission shall contract with a person to establish a bonding pool to serve as the financial assurance. And then what the purpose of the financial assurance is for is to plug dry and abandoned wells or plug orphan wells, reclaim those sites, or for any other reason that a bond may need to be forfeited for. And so that is the third-party option where we would contract with a third party to provide this financial assurance pool. In Part A there in line 9, the pool is established with funds assessed under a later paragraph that we'll get to. And Mr. Chairman, line 11, at the end of line 11 is where the Senate amendment was. That statement that starts with including any unexpended and unobligated funds available in the account established under Wyoming Statute 30-5-116. You'll see that same language in other parts of the bill. But in this case, in this paragraph, the language originally seemed to limit the funds available to those assessed under this paragraph, Romanet 5. And we wanted to just make sure it was clear that funds also in 30-5-116 are available to be used. And I'll detail what that is here when we get to that point in the statute. And then it says at the bottom of that paragraph, as otherwise provided, no other funds shall be used without further legislative authorization. In the next section B, if it is authorized, then we can use those additional funds if the legislature does authorize that, or if it's authorized by law. Mr. Chairman, at the bottom of page 3, if we determine that contracting with that third party to establish a bonding pool is impossible, impractical, or not feasible, then we can establish the bonding pool at the commission ourselves, again, so that we don't run past the June 2026 deadline for operators to post their federal bond. Because as soon as they can't post the bond and they're out of business, then it's too late for those operators. And then again, it copies some of that language of what the bonding pool and what those financial assurances can be used for, and that's for plugging of dry or abandoned wells, reclamation requirements, and so on. And then the bonding pool established under this paragraph is managed by the commission. It would require operators, again, to be in compliance with bonding requirements, maintain compliance. And at the bottom of page 4, Mr. Chairman, it would be funded by contributions from each operator participating in the pool, again with paragraph Romanet 5 of the subsection. And so now we've come to that section. So how these bonding pools would be funded is the commission would impose an assessment on each voluntarily participating operator on their fair cash market value of all oil and gas produced or sold in the state. And so essentially what it mimics, and for those of you familiar with the commission's current statutes, it would mimic the mill levy, the conservation tax that operators pay into the commission. And so anybody voluntarily participating in this would pay this additional mill levy to fund the bonding pool. And as you can see in that paragraph, Mr. Chairman, it's initially set at 0 mills. And then beginning on July 1st, 2030, the commission could adjust that up to a maximum of 0.5 of 1 mil on the dollar. And for comparison, our current conservation tax allows anywhere between 0 and 0.8 of a mil on the dollar, and it's actually currently set right now at 0.5 of a mil as well. And Mr. Chairman, any funds, bottom of page 5, those funds are just deposited into that same account that's set up from the conservation tax, which is the 30-5-116B. So that's our conservation tax mill levy statute. And we would account for those funds separately in that statute. And they can only be expended for purposes of this bonding pool. So the commission couldn't access those funds for any other purpose. Moving on to page 6, Mr. Chairman, we'll see some of that language that the other side pulled into the amendment at the top in Romanet 6. If the funds collected under that previous paragraph are insufficient to satisfy any bonding obligations of the pool, then the commission may expend any unexpended and unobligated funds available in the account established under 30-5-116. So what we did is just copy that same language into the other part of the statute that said how the funds are created. The funds were created either from a fee or from any unexpended or unobligated funds in that 30-5-116 account. We just wanted to make sure we had copied it all in all the places where it talked about the funds. Mr. Chairman, again, funds under this subsection shall only be expended on expenses associated with the same requirements that we've already mentioned for plugging orphan wells, reclaiming sites, and so on. At the bottom of page 6, Mr. Chairman, it allows, is language that allows the commission to enter in agreements with any federal agency to provide for the plugging of wells, reclamation of sites, and so on. And what this section does is it would allow the commission to enter an MOU or an MOA or some other agreement with the BLM to say, if we could go out and, if you have an operator that is out of compliance and the wells need to be plugged, or you find an orphan well and we have the funding available out of this bonding pool, we could, Mr. Chairman, go out and do that work. We could tell the BLM, we've got this agreement, we'll go plug the well. You guys don't need to forfeit the bond. We can take care of it without an issue and without forfeiting the bonds. And if we can do that cheaper than what the bond amount would be that we'd have to provide in the forfeiture of the bond, then we have that authority to go make that agreement and do that work. On the top of page 7, Mr. Chairman, it allows the commission to transfer bonds. So if an operator transfers wells to another operator and they had posted bonding in this financial assurance pool, they could transfer the bonds to the next operator. Mr. Chairman, the next section at the bottom of page 7 is an important one. And what this idea is, it says the commission may establish a process where if an operator is in good standing and is paid into the bonding pool, that we may reduce the requirements associated with furnishing a surety bond or other guarantee in accordance with the act. And what this section does is it envisions over time, as a bonding pool grows, as operators participate and pay into that bonding pool, that we would essentially have a self-funded pool, and we could reduce the requirements of an operator to further pay into that pool. We could essentially be self-bonding. The pool itself would cover all of the liabilities for those operators, and the operators would not have to pay fees or post any additional bond. And in doing so, on the next pages, it gets into some requirements that we'd have to analyze before we would allow the reduction of the fees or the bonding, the bond amounts for the fees for an operator. Would not be allowed to increase a risk that an operator is unable to satisfy any plugging or repairing requirements for the operator's wells. It can't impair the financial condition of the pool itself for its ability to plug or repair wells. So we couldn't have it be a scenario where we allowed operators to not pay in and then we couldn't satisfy the requirements of plugging wells or reclaiming sites and run out of money in that pool. We'd have to make sure that it was sufficient enough to be able to handle all the liabilities. Mr. Chairman, in the middle of page 8, the statute also just sets up a reporting requirement for the commission to submit an annual report to the Joint Minerals Committee and Joint Appropriations Committee on how many operators are participating, the amount of funds we've collected, any funds at the top of page 9, any funds that we've expended under the program, and the number of bonds and things that we're supporting. So just kind of a basic update annually on what the program activity is. Mr. Chairman, page 9, part B is a backstop to the backstop. So this is the third part of the funding source or the bonding source. So we've set up an agreement with a third party to provide financial assurance, and the commission has the mill levy added to that to provide a backup to that financial assurance. And now what we're saying is if for some reason we have an issue with both of those and they run out of money, then the commission can use the financial, we'll have a backup to the backup essentially, or a backstop to the backstop. And we will have funding available at the bottom of page 9 in Romanet I of the conservation tax to be able to backfill any issue there. So, if both of those initial funding pools run out of money, then we could still use the conservation tax to cover up any of those obligations. And Mr. Chairman, that's essentially what's out there today. If we, as it currently stands today, if we have an operator that go bankrupt and has orphan wells, we would forfeit their bonds and use those to plug the operator's wells, reclaim the sites, and so on. If that is not sufficient, then we go to the current conservation tax, which is what this is allowing in the future to cover any additional costs. And that conservation tax, again, is paid by industry right now. So essentially, industry is covering any unbonded costs at this point, and this backstop to the backstop just does the same thing. Mr. Chairman, the requirements here now get a little bit repetitive because it allows us to do the same things. We could partner with a third party if we need to. The operator's got to be in good standing. There's a part there on the bottom of page 10, Mr. Chairman, that I want to just make sure everyone understands. It does mention that we can contract with a company that's certified under the United States Department of Treasury Bureau of Fiscal Services as an approved surety bond company. That's there because the federal agencies require, if they're accepting surety, if there's an insurance company writing the surety bond, that they have to be certified under that department of the US government to be acceptable to a federal agency. So we're just complying with that requirement on the surety companies themselves. Mr. Chairman, on page 11, at the top of page 11, it allows us again to enter into an agreement to plug the wells or do the work instead of forfeiting bonds, if we can do that. We cannot expend any funds using the conservation tax, using that backstop to the backstop, unless all of the other funding has been spent. So unless the surety bond and other guarantees or funds in the bonding pool are insufficient, we cannot expend any of those other funds. And in Romanet 7 there, Mr. Chairman, page 11, line 15, this is also important. If we have to hit the backstop to the backstop, then we have to come immediately report, within 10 days to the Joint Minerals and Joint Appropriations Committee. The idea there is if we're on the third level of funding, if we're on the backstop to the backstop, there was a problem in the first two and we need to come fix the statute or the rules or the program. We need to come report to the committees and work on a fix for that. And so it just requires essentially immediate reporting of an issue. Mr. Chairman, I think the rest of the next couple pages are just repetitive from what we've had about good standing and other agreements there. What we'll do is move to page 13. And Mr. Chairman, this is 30-5-116 that currently exists. The rest of the language in the statute is just conforming language. So it references in the existing statute that the conservation tax funding on page 14, you can see the addition there, that it could also be used to cover any expenses of plugging orphan wells, reclamation, mirroring language in this bill to just make sure that it's in the existing statute. And then on page 15 and 16, you'll see reference to this new statute 30-5-129 in sections of our existing bonding language and statute. And then finally, on the last page, are the effective dates, and it has a split effective date. It allows an effective date immediately for the commission to begin rulemaking, and then otherwise July 1st to begin the program. But that allows us to get ahead of the timeframes required for agency rulemaking to be able to get the program off the ground. And Mr. Chairman, if I haven't confused the whole committee with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kropatch. Representative Knapp, please.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kropatch, so when this first came out from the federal government, immediately was an alarm to the industry, and it covered two things. One is where to get bonding from, and the other was the amount of the bond that came up. And so we've solved one with this bill, is where you can have the option to get bonding. But the other, I think doing a self-funding bonding pool, you kind of get to the end where this covers actual costs versus what the government would guess would be a closure cost, which helps. But for the amount of bonding, the 10,000 to 150,000 and the 25,000 to 500,000, we really can't do anything with, and I know we haven't solved that problem. And are we just relying mostly on the new administration to change that amount of bonding?
Mr. Kropatch.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Knapp, that's correct. There's a hope that either there's additional time frame to try to let industry comply, or maybe a change in the bonding amounts that, in my mind, seem to be a little excessive the way they were set up. when you consider cost for plugging, you know, in my mind, it should be more of a site-specific scenario. Let's look at the wells and the operator and figure out an appropriate bond versus just a blanket number across the nation. And so at this point, this program would allow an operator to comply with the existing bonding amounts required by the federal government, whatever they would be set at.
Follow-up? Any other questions from the committee? Any other questions for Director Kopacz? Director, one question I have is, we have worked this bill extensively over the interim, but we have some new members here that haven't been involved in that. But this was a lifeline to our small operators with the new policy, federal policy on bonding that was, as you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, completely would devastate them, costing more than what they make in more than a year's time in profits, actually more than profits, gross receipts. As we envision how this works, on page 5, it talks about you could impose a mill levy up to anywhere from zero up to 0.5 of 1 mil. Would that be the same for all operators, or is the mill levy going to be different by operator based on financial conditions and how well they do it, or is it levelized for everyone?
Mr. Chairman, it would be level for everyone from the mill levy. They may, in the third-party arrangement where they'd pay a fee for the surety and for that first set of financial assurance from the third party, there may be a different fee, or there probably would be a different fee per operator based on their specific well conditions, you know, the remaining life of the wells and depth and cost to plug and things like that. But in the mill levy portion of it, which provides the commission's backstop fund, that would be the same. And we would evaluate how many bonds are out there and, you know, that are covered by that, and try to set that fee so that it's not a burden to the operators, but still provides the backstop that's necessary in that account for the amount of bonding that it's backing up.
Thank you, Mr. Kopacz. And recognizing that some wells cost more than others to plug, if an operator has wells that are in a deep formation versus one that's maybe a coal bed methane, there's a vast difference in the cost there. So I like the 3 levels of protection: the operator's financial condition, and then this bonding program, and then the conservation tax. So I'm assuming that all recourses would be expended for the operator to pay for their own plugging and abandonment costs before we hit this bond. So if that happens and the operator comes back to life or regains financial ability to be able to continue to operate, and they want to get back into this program, I'm sure you'll have some way of verifying that they're financially strong again to be able to take on that responsibility. Otherwise, they could become a liability each time to this bond. And repeat offenders, I notice you have ability to remove them, but repeat offenders, you know, that has to be dealt with in some way. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The way I envision it is we would utilize the expertise of those surety companies that we're partnering with to write the bond, to evaluate the company, you know, their credit worthiness, their actions maybe in other states, to try to figure out if they're a good actor or not. So we try to utilize the expertise in those entities versus trying to hire that ourselves. We would have, you know, obviously have knowledge of their operations in our state and potentially in other states as well to help inform that. But, you know, credit worthiness and those kind of scenarios. And maybe it's just to set a higher fee for companies that are more of a risk potentially, but are still allowed to participate.
Thank you. Representative Lawley, welcome and good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much. Sorry for being here late. And good morning, Mr. Kopacz, and also for you, Senator Rothfuss. Good to see you. It was a pleasure to work with you during the work group on this issue. And I'm sure, I just want to make sure that this is really, really clear, and that's that there's no taxpayer dollars being used in this program. We are using the money from operators themselves and money that is existing that's you have in your funds. Is that correct?
Mr. Kropatch?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, that's correct. And the industry funding is also no one's forcing that operator to participate. So that's still 100% voluntary as well.
Thank you. Do you feel,
Representative Lawley.
sorry, excuse me, follow up, Mr. Chairman. Got to get back in the groove here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you believe that this bill gives you the flexibility to operate the program that you need?
Director Kropatch?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, I think it does. Obviously, we'll work with all the stakeholders in the rulemaking to make sure we have a framework there that works for the industry and provides the protection they need and provides the bonds they need. And so I think it does give us that flexibility.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Senator, thank you for being here to our little committee. Appreciate you coming in attendance. I saw some other senators that popped in and saw that you were here and figured you got this handled, so they went away, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll give you the floor.
Sorry I was late. I was presenting another bill across the hall, but I wanted to come over for this, obviously a very important piece of legislation. I think one of the more important things we probably did during the off-season. and
Would you
through the
introduce
session.
yourself, please?
My apologies,
for the
Mr.
record?
Chairman. Senator Chris Rothfuss. And to point out, we started this off obviously to solve a problem with regard to operators on federal lands and particularly small operators, but this evolved very nicely so that it's for all operators in the state. And as this is a successful program moving forward, the hope is that it would bring down the costs of bonding for all operators, and therefore more capital can be deployed in operations rather than bonding. So there's a lot of upside to this approach, and we're really excited to have partners step up that we're able to really make this a better product overall. So I'm excited that this bill is going to pass and keep our small operators, which represent about 30% of our production, out in the field doing what they do.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions for the senator? Senator, I have a question. This was in a reaction to increased regulations and bonding requirements from the federal government that were going to be hugely detrimental to our small industry, the small producers. And as I described it before, as a lifeline to be able to keep them going. Are other states, do you know of any other states that doing this in response to that change in regulation, or is Wyoming the only one?
Mr. Chairman, I know that our idea was being discussed a little bit with other states, and I'm not sure whether any of them have gotten to the point where they're copying or doing something similar. Maybe if Pete's back there and Tom's back there, they may be able to provide some updates on that, but I know that other states were looking at what we were doing and following it as an option that they could participate in as well.
So, Senator, once again, Wyoming leads the pack? All right. Director Kropatch, you were nodding your head as if you have some information.
Mr. Chairman, I can say I've taken calls from multiple states that are interested in this bill, and from at least one Canadian province that is also interested in looking at what we're doing here. So you're correct on the leading the pack there.
Thank you. All right, any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much for being here. Any other government agencies? We have a representative. Locke, do you wish to testify on this bill?
And Mr. Chairman, I have to leave. I've got other committee work right now, so if you need me for anything, please let me know.
We
Otherwise, I'll
understand.
take
Thank you for
Appreciate
taking
it.
out some time in your schedule.
Thank you all.
Chain him down, he's got to stay.
Good morning, Representative Locke. Thank you for being here.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Representative Tony Locke, House District 35, and I'll keep it short because I just wanted to say I'm on and for this amendment. I just hope this bill, it's really critical to our local people. I always like to give the story of small oil, right? I mean, there's maybe 400 plus small oil people. Think about how they are important. These are people in our neighborhood, and every one of those companies, they're feeding another 2 or 3, sometimes 4 or 5 companies. So this industry is so important to the state. I mean, I don't know exactly what the number is, but I've heard as high as we lose 15% of our revenue if these people are hurt bad enough. This is a big deal. So I just want to, again, I'm strongly for this bill. It's very critical for our people, it's for our neighborhoods, it's our local families, it's all of those things, but I stand for questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Any questions for Chairman Locke? Thank you for being here in your testimony. Pete and Tom, I think it's time to hear from the experts.
And a professional.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pete Obermuller, President of Petroleum Association of Wyoming. I'm feeling really sad at the Vice Chairman's comments about my choice of profession. So I'm going to turn it all over to Mr. Van Cleef to talk.
Tom, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tom Van Cleef. I'm not a professional talker. So I might use my full allocation of words speaking with you because I've got a long drive home and I don't get to work with anybody back home in the patch. And that's for our colleagues in the back of the room who have started their watch. Director Kropatch covered the details of the bill. And Mr. Chairman, with reference to your statement that there's a couple of people who were not involved in the creation of the bill, I'd just like to cover it from the perspective of a small operator. For those of you who know me, bear with me. I have a field up in Natrona County. It's got 8 wells. We make asphalt. And my first well was spudded in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor. So that's an indication that, as we all know, oil and gas and energy, we're here for America and we're here for Wyoming. When the federal government increased their bonding rates, and by the way, those bonding rates are in effect right now. Anybody who goes in to have to rebond or initially bond has to do it right now. But I have a colleague at the shallow end of the gene pool in the oil and gas industry who pointed out to me that the field that he's got in southern Wyoming has a couple of wells that cross over into our colleagues in Colorado. So his nationwide bond that he got expires in June of this year. And he's going to have to put in 2 $500,000 statewide bonds. Or if he's lucky and he can get it figured out, he might be able to get away with putting in 2 single lease bonds. So this is the timeline on this is more accelerated than we thought. For operators like myself who have 2 leases, I got 1 well on 1 lease. They told me there would be no math, so I apologize. I have 7 wells on the other lease. I've got to get a $500,000 bond to replace $25,000 in cash that we scraped up, and I got to do it by the middle of next year. The timeline on this is critical. The ability to start making rules immediately is going to be critical. The ability to push those rules through quickly is going to be critical. Because we could lose a lot of operators. Chairman Locke mentioned some numbers. And for those of you who I've had the opportunity to work with, and those of you who have had to suffer through listening to me once or twice, it's 470 small operators. There are 470 Wyoming businesses that are small operators that are going to be impacted by this bill. That's 14,000 Wyoming households that could be put out of work. That's an amazing amount. I mean, I had somebody provide me some information and said how much of the population it was and how much of the turnout on the last election it was. It's 12.5% of the turnout on the last election would be impacted by this. Yeah, those 470 operators, that's 85% of the operators that we have in the state of Wyoming. So the shallow end of the gene pool is most of the people sitting at the table. And yes, we produce 30% of the oil and gas, and that accounts for about 15% of the state's budget. So from a perspective of people who are not even in the oil and gas industry, what we're trying to do with this bill is not only protect Wyoming families and protect Wyoming's critical industries, but even if you don't like the critical industry, we're trying to prevent the state from taking a 15% haircut within the next 36 months. And with a 15% haircut, there is no way that critical and essential services will not be adversely impacted in every community. Getting to the bill itself, the folks that were on the working group that I had the privilege of being asked to join, and I was happy to join them, and it was a It was a wonderful experience. The bill and the third-party option reduces the risk to the state. As Representative Lawley, Mr. Chairman, as Representative Lawley asked, yeah, there are no taxpayer dollars used in this. Number one, there's no taxpayer dollars. It's funded voluntarily by the industry. Number two, by using the third-party system, which is the primary that I think the state wants to use, by using that third-party system, we don't increase the size of our state government. It's a completely voluntary program. Conservation tax is something that has to be paid, and nobody likes paying taxes, but in the oil and gas industry, we understand what that's there for, and that's one of the things that we're happy to pay because it's important to the state and it's important to the industry. This program is voluntary. So if at some point in time, the Oil and Gas Commission, the state, needs to put that additional I think it comes out to half of a mill levy in place, it's a voluntary issue. It's a voluntary thing. To me, as an operator, that's a critical thing. I think it's important to understand that the way they've got this designed, it leaves the primary responsibility for managing and plugging and abandoning my wells with me and my peers. We have the responsibility to manage and maintain our fields, and we will do that because we're Wyoming. And operators in Wyoming, we do what's right. We take care of what we're supposed to take care of. A lot of people may not understand that, but we will. We'll figure out a way to plug and abandon those wells, even if it takes us 20 years. But if you can't do that, then the option with the third-party option, as I understand it, would be that, yeah, I need to go into third party and say, hey, help me out here. And the third party has the option to take over. They can do some of the things that need to be done so the bond doesn't have to be forfeited. Let me give you an example. I've got one lease that has one well on it, and it's 2,500 feet deep. State of Wyoming uses a $10 per foot plugging and abandoning number as their estimate. Those of you who know me know that I oftentimes talk about the best engineer I've ever met, smartest person I've ever met, and I married her. She's the smartest person, irregardless of her taste in men. I know that she could do it for less than $10 a foot, but a 2,500 foot deep well, at $10 a foot is $25,000, not $150,000. So I think when the rules are written and the system's put in place, it's going to give us the option not to have to forfeit all of these bonds and have all of that money go into the yawning jaws of the federal government where it'll never be seen again. And quite honestly, I'm not sure it would be used to plug those wells. Okay? But once all that occurs, once the third party does its thing with regard to the wells, before the states even talk to. And I'm going to refer to my notes here a second. I think it's page 12, line 12. Let me see. And I apologize. Yeah, it is. It's page 12 and it's line 12, where it talks about if the surety bond isn't sufficient, you got to go through the operator first, then the operator's assets, then the third-party provider, then the surety bond that the third-party provider has organized for us through this program, and you got to go through all of that before they even contact the state and say, hey, you got to pony up a little bit of money for this because guess what? We don't have enough. That's a tremendous savings. That's a tremendous thing. As a taxpayer, I love that. Because we're using not taxpayers' money, and we're not even using the money the industry is putting in. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned about, and I think Mr. Vice Chairman, you might have mentioned that this makes Wyoming lead the way. It does. Not only are other states and other countries interested in this process, but if you take a step back a second and look away from the immediate critical nature of this, okay? Remember, June of this year. All right, the rules are in place right now, but they're gonna start hammering us in June of this year. And in June of next year, we're gonna start losing companies and businesses. But if you look a little further beyond that, the opportunity, as Director Kropatch said, for this to become kind of a self-sustaining, self-bonding issue, if you look down the road and you look at the investment things and you do all the math that people much smarter than me can do, there is the possibility for this to transform the oil and gas industry, absolutely in the state of Wyoming, but potentially Wyoming can lead the way nationwide, perhaps in North America. Because what this allows us to do is take wells that are marginal, that we might not have the opportunity to keep operating, not because they don't produce oil and gas, but because the bonding requirements are too significant, but because an operator gets a little bit older. I know I have a youthful look, but I can't do this for 20 more years. But my wells can. My wells, the way the geology is set up, my wells are going to keep pumping until my great-grandchildren have decided that they don't need asphalt for the roads. Okay? With that in mind, those wells should have the opportunity to continue to produce for Wyoming and America. This bill will give us they'll give us a tool to be able to do that. And if we do that, we transform the industry, because at the end of the life of the well, we've got the resources to plug them. And conceivably, and if the math is wrong, y'all can come up to Casper and, beat me up with a fungo bat. But conceivably, there's an opportunity for this thing to become to the point where the Oil and Gas Commission's conservation taxes that we pay in won't ever be able to be tapped. Because this solution that we've come up with here, that y'all have come up with here, because this is the committee that said yes, this solution could make it so the Oil and Gas Commission doesn't have to worry about that. They don't have to worry about conservation tax having to be used to plug and abandon wells. And the possibilities that brings are really, really exciting. I have used up all of my words and absolutely gone over my allocation of minutes and seconds. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Van Cleef. Appreciate that testimony and compelling testimony. So we'll start with Representative Lawley and come over to the Vice Chair after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you, Mr. Van Cleef. And again, I appreciate your tireless advocacy for the small operators. You do a great job in representing them and giving us a sense of what their world is really like. And I appreciate it on the work group. I appreciate it on other bills, and I thank you so much. And I was very thankful that you mentioned your wife. I was going to give you an opportunity if you hadn't, because I love that you do that. And so I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on one of the features that I know I find very interesting and helpful for the industry, and that's the transferability issue, and how that really we're using a unique model that's kind of a hybrid, but and has a little bit of that sort of life insurance sort of approach to it that gives, it's actually by the well and not by the operator. The benefit is on the well, and what that means for transferability, the fact that it is transferable, but how does that fact and that benefit affect the everyday world in the small operator world? Could you give us a sense of that?
Mr. Van Cleef?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, thank you. And I do appreciate that question. Yes, in the bill itself, it states that the commission can have transferability, all right? I know that the third-party operators, the ones that I've talked to and just trying to use some subject matter expertise, since that's in the bill, that's something that they're willing to do. The concept is that the bonding is with a well. So if I sell the well, the bond can be acquired. It can be transferred to the next operator. What that gives me the ability to do as a small operator is, I got my field. I use my field as an example. I got one lease with one well. And if I decide that for whatever reasons that's what I want to sell, when I sell that property, I can also have the bond either through the state program, if the state has to run it, if there's not a third party that can be found, or through the third party backed by the state, that bond can then transfer to that next operator because it relies, the bonding is for the well, all right? And that, I guess it's a contract you'd have with the third party, with the surety company. That transferability means that if Mr. Obermuller decided not to be part of the talking class, and he actually wanted to throw a wrench for a living, no, that won't happen. If anybody else in the room decided they wanted to buy my field, the impediment to them purchasing it, which would be either a $150,000 bond or a $500,000 bond, is eliminated. So all they got to do is pay me fair market value for my field. I show them how everything works. I hand them the keys. I hand them my 36 and 48-inch wrenches, and they're off to the races because they do have the bonding. That's one of the transformative aspects of this bill. Because previously, one of the big limiting factors, even for the large operators, even for my friends on the, because I do sit on the Petroleum Association board. I am the shallow end of the gene pool. But even the large operators have bonding problems. They have bonding issues that they have to address when they transfer properties and they transfer assets. This gives them an option and simplifies it. For us, your friends and neighbors in Wyoming, this means that we're not having to worry about somebody coming or a pickup truck showing up in 20 years saying, hey, by the way, you owned this field 35 years ago and there's, now we're coming after you. Separate issue. But it's transformative.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Cleef. And just to follow up to that, with this transferability, won't that add market value to your field? Because you can hand the keys over and there's no liability to come up with additional bonding for the new operators?
Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you brought that up, and I hope the people who have talked to me about potentially looking at my field will listen to your wise and sage words and stop pushing back. No, I'm seriously, we're not selling the field, but yes, it would, because it's something which gives me on the sale end, if they can come in and they can qualify for their own bond and do their own bonding, then I can offset, I can value that in different ways. Okay, I can get the full market value plus the bonding value. So yes, sir, it's awesome.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Chair, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Mr. Van Cleef, thank you for your testimony, and I mean, the way the feds are looking at this, we must have a real serious problem, and I'm just curious, you've told me before, or Mr. Obermuller has, how many wells do we got sitting on the docket that need to be plug and abandoned, or how many have been? Because this obviously must be a huge problem. Do you know the number to that?
Mr. Van Cleef.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tarver, Mr. Obermuller was going to back me up with actual numbers because, like I said, there's not supposed to be any math. But the last number I heard nationwide was, I think the BLM had plugged 18 wells in a previous period of time, and that's across the country. Generally, and even individuals on the other side of this discussion will concede that it's a solution in me looking for a problem. And if I could, I know that there was a question brought up before, Mr. Chairman, I think you raised it, as to this being a federal problem. What are we doing about this? How do we push back on these federal issues? I know the Petroleum Association is very, very active. A lot of the trade associations, Western Energy Alliance, are very, very active. But some of us here in the state of Wyoming, being a small town with long roads, we've contacted our congressional delegation, and I know for a fact, I got a copy of the letter that Congresswoman, I'm going to say her name wrong.
Hageman?
Yes. Our congressperson sent out to the BLM saying, you're not doing this right. You got to take a relook at this. And I know there's efforts to address this. I know that the one part of the bill that put these bonding requirements in place and also talked about leasing. I know Senator Barraza was involved in trying to address that. But any help that we can get from our state representatives and our state senators along those lines and adding pressure would be wonderful.
All right, Representative Lawley. Oh, so follow-up first, please.
Is that all right? Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to follow up a little bit on this. So whether or not, depending on, who we got at the highest level, it doesn't really matter. This is a good bill, no matter who's coming into office. This is going to be something that's going to transfer wealth to our wells, and new wells, old wells, it won't matter. This will pretty much cure our bonding issues. And my thoughts are this bill could also transfer into other bonding issues problems that we have in the state. And I think this is a spearhead to solve one problem, but I think this could also solve multiple bonding issues that we're seeing in the state of Wyoming. Wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Van Cleef.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tarver, I do recognize the presumptive close when I see it. My personal opinion, I think the first thing we need to do is get this bill through. We need to get it out of the House. We need to get it on the governor's desk. We need to have a big party in the governor's office when he signs it. Get everybody in both houses there standing up saying, look what we did for Wyoming. Beyond that, yes, sir, I think there's a possibility that this concept that we have could be adapted to other industries. And I'll be the first one to say, I don't know enough about mining. I don't know enough about the other bonding requirements that we have, but I know that, in some discussions over greasy eggs in the morning, that has been discussed, and there's some questions about it. So if we get this done from a legislative standpoint, and then the commission works with y'all and gets the rules done and gets the rules in place, and we execute, because that's a critical thing. We have to execute quickly on behalf of the state of Wyoming. Well, then it's cut and paste.
All right,
And I would hope it would be.
Thank you, Mr. Van Cleef. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, along the same lines of, I think it was Benjamin Franklin that said, in the midst of difficulty lies opportunity. And I think that's what this situation did for us in Wyoming, to focus. We focused first because we're agile government. Other states had the same problem, I believe, and we're facing these same federal situations, but we acted, and I think that we have what I would call an elegant solution that can be modeled, and it really became more than we thought we were solving during the work group. And so I do think that's a really important point for Wyoming and for even the industry as a whole, that we can solve problems. And so, again, don't you agree?
Thank you. Mr. Obermuller.
Mr. Chairman,
Can you top the testimony we've already heard?
I cannot. I'm just going to answer one quick question on the number of wells.
Please introduce yourself.
Again, Pete Obermuller, President, Petroleum Association of Wyoming. So on fee state wells in Wyoming, there's about 500 orphan wells on the list. I think a lot of them are still sort of legacy coal bed methane. As a reminder, orphan wells, they're different than wells that are bonded, or kind of different categories, but the 500, plugging and abandoning of those operates under the conservation tax that oil and gas already pays. That pot of money deals with orphan wells. On the federal side, which I think the Vice Chairman was asking about, we're not aware of any federal orphan wells in the state at all right now. Zero.
Thank you, Mr. Obermuller. I forgot that you already introduced yourself.
No, that's quite all right.
Apologize for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Mr. Obermuller? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. It's been very compelling. Anyone else in the room that would like to provide testimony on Senate File 20? No one else? Anyone online? Tanner, no one online? With that, we'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Lawley, seconded by Representative Schmidt. Any discussion? Representative Larson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow the good words of Representative Knapp yesterday, I think this bill makes Wyoming mo better. So we'll have to use that as a mic on this bill too. So thanks, and I appreciate all the good work of the working group over the interim, and I'm proud to give this bill an aye vote.
All right, thank you, Representative Larson. Any amendments, proposed amendments, any changes rather than go through the 17 pages? No amendments, okay. Discussion, further discussion on the bill.
Question.
Just before the question, I want everyone to realize how important this bill is to the state of Wyoming. I think you got a little feel of this. With all the Senate files that came over to the speaker's desk, he has a pile about that tall. I pulled this bill out of the middle to be heard very first in our committee.
Thank you.
Because I feel like this is one of the transformational things that we can do in the state. And when we go back to our town halls after this session, everyone's going to want to know about property tax relief and our budget and all the things that we've done. I hope we bring this up as one of our high points, because we are saving 15% of the revenue of the state of Wyoming by what we're doing here today. This is huge. The previous federal administration, we know, was trying to shut down oil and gas and fossil fuels. This was an effort from this committee during the interim to come up with a solution. And when we first started, it was daunting. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know how we were going to help these small operators. But coming together with the industry, with legislators, we came up with a transformational that's going to help not only our state, but I fully believe it's going to help other states as well. And this is going to provide life to these wells. We don't realize how important these small operators are. We see the big operators in our state and they get all the headlines. They drill the new wells, produce big volumes, but it is the small operators that really are the backbone of our industry. So thank you very much for your testimony, for your help in this legislation. And with that, Mark, would you call the roll, please?
Voting on, pardon me, Senate File 20, no amendments. Representative Campbell.
Aye.
Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Lawley.
Aye.
Representative Riggins.
Excused?
Representative Schmidt.
Absolutely aye.
Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Weber.
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
8 aye, 0 no, 1 excused. This is due pass.
All right, thank you. So Senate File 20 has passed without amendments from the committee. Representative Lawley has volunteered to carry this on the floor. And with that, we're finished with our agenda for the day. We appreciate everyone being here and for the good work today, committee. Thank you. With that, meeting is adjourned.